Well, good evening. We do have a lot on the agenda tonight to discuss, so we can kind of get moving. Couple things. Start off with, we got the Wyoming Business Council grant River Project. Do you need to set this up, Carter?
If I could, Mr. Mayor, thank you. Members of the council, good evening. Good to see you tonight. As you may or may not be aware, we are in the process of preparing.
Excuse me, it's the Rolling Stones.
Yes, I recognize that tune.
That's his new record. Start me up.
We are preparing an application to the Business Council for funding to continue the work on the river through what they call the First Street Reach. And as you see here on the screen, that scope of the project covers from the old train bridge on the west side of Casper, if you will, all the way up to the Poplar Street Bridge. The train bridge is more towards the central part of Casper. I'm getting myself kind of mixed up here a little bit, sorry. So anyway, I asked Jolene to give you a brief rundown as to what the application essentially seeks from the state and what the commitments have been from our private partners, and a couple aspects with regard to what the project actually completes. And of course, any questions we'd be pleased to entertain.
Mayor, Council, Carter just outlined the reach of the river on which we're working. This is estimated to be about a $1.6 million river reach. We want to ask the Wyoming Business Council for up to $500,000. We have a $2 million grant from the Wyoming Wildlife and Natural Resource Trust that will be used to match and then leverage down river sections. So there would be no city money used, at least for the river project in this section. Now, this is in the heart of downtown. And so one of the things in the comprehensive plan that the citizens wanted to see was a riverfront park. So it's possible that we'll work with community development and people to add a riverfront park or something through here. And we would like to add a boat launch somewhere in here to give access to people, but it will be similar to what we've been doing through Murad Park and the rest of the area. There is significant contamination through here. You will recall that we approved, you all approved a study, an environmental study that is ongoing right now, that was paid for with private money. No city money went into that. And that study is nearly complete, and we are working on design right now. I'm also going to pitch to Andrew at any point if there's anything that you think that I'm forgetting on this, because he's one of our partners on this as well.
Doing just fine, Bill.
Okay. So the request would go to the Business Council. This, if you approve that we send the grant request in and they approve it, it will be our third Wyoming Business Council grant for this project.
Any questions? You're good?
I do have a question.
Charlie.
Jolene, what kind of science was there behind going west, or was there science driving the decision to go from west to east? Because we started at the west end and worked our way through Murad, and I think we're up to the water treatment plant now. Is that about right?
That's correct.
Now we're hopscotching to downtown. Are there any problems that that's going to create when we're basically leaving a big section of the river unrestored?
Ideally, we would be contiguous, but the section from the water treatment plant to the Mills Bridge is about a $5 million section. We have $3 million. We're in an interesting situation that are having a hard time going to some of our good sources of grants to get the rest of the money, because we have not used all of their money yet. So we don't quite have enough to do contiguous, and our wildlife trust grant will expire in 2020. So we wanna lose that money either. So it's not ideal, but it's not really going to hurt anything as well, at least our consultants have told us that. We would like to be working contiguously, but that's just not possible.
Yeah, and
Go ahead, Charlie.
if I may, I assume we did a detailed analysis of how this North Carolina group performed with the work that they've done so far. Were we happy with how that came out
Mayor, Your
overall?
Honor, the, one of our partners on this project is Wyoming Game and Fish, and they have been doing extensive monitoring studies through everything that's been going on, our structures, how they're holding up, what's going on. The fish numbers have absolutely increased, they can show you that. The river that we have done so far is better, for what we have done, and any questions that come along, it's still too new, but they have been monitoring all along, and so far, it's thumbs up on what's been done.
Mike?
And I'm presuming that the Corps of Engineers is involved in all this?
Your Honor, Mayor, Your Honor, and Council, yes, we have to get permits from the WDEQ and the Army Corps of Engineers before we do any work at all.
Okay, and they like what's going on out there, it's not adversely affecting stream flow rates or anything like that?
It's not. In fact, we saved infrastructure in that area. We moved the river about 80 feet to the west. We saved Wyoming Boulevard from being washed into the river. And when we got in there, we realized we had drinking water wells that were about ready to wash out, that we actually saved some of the regional water's drinking water wells with this
Yeah,
project.
yeah,
So
and I kinda knew that, but sort of wanted
we have,
to amplify it on the record a little bit.
and we do know that from the project that's been done so far, we have 800 tons of erosion that are not going into the river in just that section every year.
And so the Corps is pleased with that, I presume?
Absolutely.
And Nebraska gets all the water.
Well, yeah.
We're taking care of Nebraska.
Well, that's our favorite.
Yeah, we should pour more money into helping Nebraska.
Any other questions? Alrighty. Thanks, Jolene. The Animal Care and Control Ordinance.
Mr. Mayor, before we move on to that item, we still then will bring a formal action forward then, if council is okay with that, to formalize the business council grant as part of the rules that they expect us to follow to make applications. So that will be the formal item that you would see coming forward. The Animal Care and Control Ordinance, that has been an item of discussion for the last several weeks with regard to the public and input that they've provided and so forth. Councilman Walsh and Attorney Henley have worked very hard to put together the feedback and take portions of that into the ordinance that we wanted to review with you tonight. And if any of you have direction accordingly, we would need that tonight, as my anticipation would be that this would be prepared for formal consideration on the floor, as well as your requisite public hearings and so on, probably starting the new year unless council would direct otherwise.
It's more than 34 days, right?
It would be more than 34 days, yes.
I'm
Henley wanted to
approving.
be certain of that.
Let's go to the
so-
next matter.
I'm just kidding, John. I didn't mean to throw you under the bus. So if I could turn the
I don't
time
need,
over-
I don't need to hear any more.
Hold on,
I may
Charlie's
ask
got
a
some.
bunch
No,
of
no, that's all
questions
right.
if
Go
I
ahead.
have to hear too much.
Are you
Don't
gonna-
worry, I'll stop you.
You have something to say, or are you taking questions?
No, I was gonna visit with you all day.
Okay, go ahead. I can wait.
Go ahead,
Okay,
John.
do you want me down?
Chris.
I think it'd be great if you-
Okay, yeah.
Go ahead, Chris.
From what you saw initially, and I suspect, well, it was in the packet, but you may not have taken a look at it. There's been a lot of incorporations based on public input and modifications, so it's not what you saw when it was first presented. And I bet Mr. Henley has a lot of those areas highlighted, and we'll talk about some of those. And then I know the judge said that it might be good if we just talked about the points of contention as well, or the significant points, instead of line by line in this dude, so.
Fair enough. Well, thank you, Your Honor, Counsel, Mr. Napier. We really had, I think, a pretty good discussion. It went well, getting all the public input. We sat down, Lieutenant Dabney as well as Councilman Walsh and I, two Fridays, One Friday it was about 2.5 hours, the other Friday it was about 2 hours, just going through documents and cross-referencing things and then making modifications and trying to update this and incorporate those things which we thought would be appropriate, kind of given our understanding of council and the direction that we were hoping to visit with you about. One of the problems that was originally discussed and we thought needed to be addressed, and which I think we had multiple comments saying that should be addressed, are animals at large. There are just too many people letting their animals go. They're uncontrolled. They will knock people down. They will bite people. They will go after other animals. And I think there was a lot of discussion about that the last time. So we had our animal at large provision in here. We also received comments, though, that maybe we were being a little bit too harsh with people that had good animals and that were good owners. And so we modified it a little bit. If you have a non-dangerous animal or a non-vicious animal now, you can let them stay on your own property and they don't have to be fenced in. So if you have an old dog that sits up on the porch and just sits there and never goes off your property, it's not going to be cited for being at large just because it's, hasn't caused any problems. If it goes off your property, though, you're going to still be cited at large. So that's one of the changes that we had. Another problem that was referenced in some of the comments was that, well, you're making us scaring tours. That if our neighbor lets our animal out because they want to sabotage us, we shouldn't have to pay the price for that. And we put a provision in there that, I don't think that would have been the case in any event, but we put a provision in there that unless you purposely let the animal go or you don't take reasonable precautions to let it out or to maintain it, then you can be cited at large. But if somebody else opens the gate, that type of thing, if there's some type of an accident where your gate's left open by the postman or somebody crashes into your fence and your dog escapes, you're not going to be cited at large for that. So that's another concern that was raised in some of the public comments that we wanted to address. The service animal provision, we tied that to the federal law as opposed to the state law. That was raised by some folks too. The temperature in cars for animals was lowered to 60 degrees. At that point, the police department has authority then to investigate and make a determination based on whether you have cloudy skies or sunny skies, how hot the ambient temperature is, if the windows are down very much or not. And so at that point, we've lowered that so that people can be a little bit more comfortable that animals aren't going to be treated cruelly or potentially be put at risk of harm or death. The decisions about reckless animal owners. We had several comments about that, and basically we've made it into two types of categories. One for smaller infractions such as at-large or nuisance animals, and in that case there's 3 or more times within a period of 18 months as opposed to 24 months, so it actually gives people a little bit more leeway. Then they can be deemed a reckless animal owner, and then their tags would be pulled, and they would need to not be owning an animal, otherwise they would be in violation of not having their animals tagged. And then we have another one, again, which we've lowered the penalty if it's a violation for a vicious and dangerous animal being at large or biting, that type of things, 2 or more times in the period of 3 years. Before we had that 5 years. So again, that gives people a little bit more leeway. And we have then also determined that the animal owners can actually get rehabilitation in a quicker period of time, actually within 6 months for one of the non-vicious problems, and a period of 1 year with a vicious problem, if they go through the training and actually take action to protect the public from what their animal had done in the past. Finally, we have some changes which I put before you about technical changes, and I handed that out. There's 2 pages. One was that the City Parks Department is not the department responsible for offering dog exhibition permits. It's the Recreation Division office. And then the penalty provision, which was sent out to you in the packet of last week, actually was a little bit over expansive. We knew that the way we had phrased it before, given the comments, was too particular and had too many steps in it, so we just narrowed it to say the judge would have the discretion to make a determination as to the penalty based upon our usual statutory mandate of $750 fine or 6 months of jail or both. But thinking about it, well, that was just too broad for animals being at large or not cleaning up your animal's waste or something like that. So the only time the judge would have authority to issue a jail term would be for a vicious or dangerous violation. And in those cases, she's not mandated to, but it's a possibility. And so those are the basic changes that we've had, and appreciate some of your comments too when you've called in. And any questions, I'll be happy to answer those, or I'm sure Councilman Walsh will be happy to visit with you about that as well.
Charlie, did you have any?
I guess a question and comment. To me, it's a pretty major change to say that dogs don't have to be leashed when they're on our trails. And I have a problem with that. I think they should be, and I think people should be able to walk on our trails without having to worry. And I realize that the owners are saying, well, my dog has never bitten anyone. This is our chance to, enjoy time without that restriction. But if I'm on that trail, I don't know your dog. I don't know what your dog's going to do. And if I'm riding on the trail and the dog comes running at me, that's an accident waiting to happen. So I think we should require them to be leashed. I also have a problem with this business of having certain times during the day where dogs don't have to be leashed in a park for the same reason. Again, 98% of the people who are playing Frisbee with their dog, it's perfectly safe for everyone. But I don't know which dog is which, and nor does the parent of a young child that's playing on the playground.
Sure.
So I think we're being too loose with those things.
And I know originally that we were kind of that same mindset, but given the public comment, we thought that it may be best to have at least some specific times. Now, the times would apply for pathways as well. So it's just a matter of times as to when they can take their dogs out to walk them around the block before work, or take them out and play Frisbee or ball with them after work. And so for those periods of times, there's a distinct period of time that they can go out and not have their dogs on their leash. But they're still responsible for the dogs, unless it's a dangerous or vicious dog and it's been deemed as such, then they cannot do that at all.
Well, for follow-up, if I may, the problem with the vicious dog definition is the only way that label gets attached to a dog is if the damage has already been done. And now you've got someone who's traumatized. And some people are traumatized for life after a dog attack. I know, because I've seen them in my office. And I think we just have to do a better job of protecting people from those traumatic experiences.
And I understand that basically the at-large limitation really needs to be enforced more stringently, and I know that we received multiple comments on that too. But what we were hoping to do here is to have a certain balance there, and if you're concerned about dogs, have a particular fear of dogs, or you have children, in these 2 periods of time, one which is very early in the morning and most people aren't out walking or biking at that period of time, would be available for people to go out before they go off to work and let their dog exercise and enjoy their dogs a little bit. The other one would be basically when people get back home, and so the people that don't have a big yard, people that are runners or whatever, they want to get out and enjoy their dog, and it's good for the dog as well to be out. We have those 2 specific periods. That was the rationale.
I'd be interested to hear what other people think of that. I mean, I understand what you're saying. We're essentially creating a temporary dog park. That's what we're doing, it sounds like.
Isn't that what Murad is?
Well, that's permanent dog park. I mean, temporary meaning certain hours of the day. And if you're afraid of dogs, don't go to the parks during that period of time.
We've got Bob, Sean, and Mike. Bob.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, I concur with what Councilman Powell says. I think looking at what transpires in Washington Park, we have a city function that's there for 2.5 months or 2 months out of the summer that brings 700 or 800 people in there, and most of the people have their dogs on leashes, but there's a lot of people that come in there and eat their picnic lunch before they have the concert at 7 o'clock or 7:30. And there's an awful lot of groups that use the park for picnics. And when you've got a bunch of little kids running down, my idea of a vicious dog is a 40-pound dog that knocks over a 2-year-old. And That can happen. It can be a perfectly friendly dog. But I just don't think it's appropriate to just say, no, between these two times, you can just take your dog off the leash. I just don't think that's appropriate. The other problem, I personally have experience with dogs on the path, dogs even on a cable. And some people will have 3 dogs on a cable. And the cable splits and has 3 dogs. They still take up the whole path. And you better walk by a dog, even if you're in the place where they're supposed to be on chain or on a leash. You just have to get off your bike, because you never know. All it takes is that dog to just run between you or run up and get in your tire, and you're on the ground and wounded. And we have instances in this town that that's happened.
Sean?
I agree with Bob and Charlie. I don't think dogs should be off leash anywhere other than a designated dog park, period. Or on your property.
Mike?
I agree with Charlie, Bob, and Sean for all the reasons that they've said. But I would also just offer that, I think we owe an obligation to the people to draft ordinances and things that are easy to understand and not complicated. And I can just picture, oh, well, I thought that there was an exception for this hour or that hour. Well, I didn't know this and I didn't know that and all that. And so I really think that if we're gonna have a leash law, let's have a leash law. The other thing that I feel is that, this business about, well, okay, my dog's in my yard, so why should it have to be fenced or leashed when it's in my yard? Well, if I'm walking down the sidewalk, and I don't know if that's that dog's home yard, or if it's an adopted yard, or or what it is. And I don't think that people walking down the sidewalk should have to do so under the worry that is that dog that's just laying there, is that 20-year-old rover that doesn't rove anymore, or is that a dog that's just laying there and wait for somebody to come out? And it's just as scary to a lot of people to have a dog just come charging out there and go whir, 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 whir. In many instances, as it is to have the dog come snarling out and grab on and bite you, is when the dog comes out and barks because he doesn't want you to come into his yard, you don't know if that's what that dog's going to do next. And so I feel that those dogs need to be restrained. Number one, in the parks and the paths and sidewalks and all that stuff at all times. And I think that we need to have, I like the Councilman Walsh's language about either, tethered or in a fenced enclosure adequate to contain the dog, whether if it's on its property or not. And I know that there are a lot of people in the public that will, it's my property and I should be allowed to have my dog loose on my property if I want. Well, walk down the sidewalk and have a dog come charging up. It's scary enough when they come charging up to a good sturdy fence, let alone come, charging up when there's no fence and nothing there at all. So, those are two things that I feel pretty strongly about. What I would suggest is that we if we can come to a consensus on some of these points, that if everybody agrees that they should be leashed everywhere, then great. If everybody doesn't agree with that, then we can draft this stuff in a different direction.
Other comments or questions for John? Dallas?
I just have a comment. I'm not gonna be able to vote on this ordinance, so I'm really not gonna speak about the ordinance. But I listened to the comments, and it's almost like, when I was a little kid and they were blowing atomic bombs down in Nevada. They made us all hide under our desk when the cloud went over. It scared us all. Because the only time you're gonna have a problem, whether you have a leash law, whatever you have, is if the dog bites somebody. And then that dog will be dealt with. And I don't think you can jam up every porous hole in this deal. And I do see people, my dog's always leashed, and I do see people at the parks, and they're throwing the frisbee and they're throwing the ball, and the dogs are running off leash and all of that. I don't take him to Murad Park because I keep him on a leash and I don't want any other big dogs jumping on him. Charlie's deal about the bicycle, that could be a problem, even if the dog's leashed. So I don't think that, I think the idea behind this ordinance is truly, if, I'd be happy if people would just leash their dog when they had it in public, period. That's all I'd say, just leash your dog in public. And if it's a big dog, and what I think of a vicious dog is ones that have the propensity to be vicious. Certain breeds that have the propensity to be vicious. Any dog, of course, could bite somebody depending upon what happened. And you can invent all kinds of scenarios, but I think that the council will do a very good job if they can just bring the leash law into awareness and people will actually follow that law. That will curb many of the problems that Mr. Walsh has addressed. Some of these other things, they're just, these are animals. Your best shot is, who knows what's gonna happen, but if the dog's leashed, you do have some control on it. But I walk over by the Nick and I've got him on a leash and here comes some guy ripping down on a bike 20 miles an hour. And for instance, in Boulder, you can't ride the bike on a sidewalk. That could be an ordinance in this city. You shouldn't be riding bikes on the sidewalk because you can be hit people also. So if that little dog runs out there and it gets wrapped up in the tires, it's gonna be treacherous for the bike rider and for the dog and everybody else involved. So it's just not the dog on a leash, it's other elements that are causing the problem. They're playing golf over there in the park where I walk him a lot, and the kids are hitting golf balls all over the place. Hit you in the head with one. Nobody says anything about that kind of thing. I just kind of work around it. I see them and I walk a different way. But if I could get people to do one thing, it'd be leash their dog when they're in public. And if their dog has a habit of barking and snipping at people, what are those deals you call, Chris, where you put it over their mouth?
Muzzle.
But there's a muzzle sort of leash that you can guide them with that. And I do see people use that, and that's always a thought because that will stop the dog from biting anybody, period, if the dog's in public, because that's all we're really worried about. If somebody comes up in my yard and gets snafu'd with my dog, they shouldn't be trespassing in my yard. Of course, he'd just lick them anyway, but I think the main problem in this city is people respecting each other well enough to leash their dogs. I don't have really much with these. I just think it's something, and Mike said it, we've got to get it where people understand it. And these are our citizens, and this is Wyoming, and people live a little bit of a freer life, and I like seeing a little boy out there throwing a ball for his dog in the park. I don't mind it. I'm more careful about the dog. But I think that this ordinance is needed. It's interesting, Chris, that the paper endorsed the ordinance. So they don't endorse a lot of stuff that the council does. Huh? But so I just see the leash as being the most important feature of this ordinance, period.
Chris.
I think that the most important aspect of the ordinance that we have in here is that we've taken an element where we can attach it to people that are irresponsible. Let's face it, it's not animal problems we have, it's human problems we have. And every time you've got, I guess I shouldn't say every time, there's probably a conceivable time where it didn't happen. Every negative encounter is, the root cause is a human. And we've never associated any negative consequences long-term to somebody that just keeps putting out these types of animals. And when you talk about breeds, there are certain breeds that certainly have stronger bite forces. They have, when they bite you, it causes more damage. That's always the bright line thing, but some of those aren't bad because the people that raise them don't train them to be bad. And I'll tell you, this has been an issue for years, and I'll bet maybe close to 10 years ago, maybe you were on council, I tried to restrict the breeds because of tax.
She's been on for 20 years.
Yeah, it was about as bad as motorcycle tailpipes and guns.
Been married
council.
times.
But it's not breeds, it's the behavior. Address the behavior and then look at and address the behavior of the people that are creating the problem. And here's the thing, you know, talk about being in Wyoming. Well, let's look at it from Wyoming values. If you're grown enough to have a dog, you're grown enough to take care of it. That means if it's dangerous to people, you take proper action so that it is not dangerous. And if that means you have to have it euthanized or you have to have it taken somewhere where it's caged, that's what has to be done. And so that is my main gist on this. And I know there's been a lot of talk there. There actually is, the lady from K&M talked about a mouse attack in the reports in here. That is in there. I thought I had gone through and counted over all those, but I added it. So we'll talk about mice after this one's done.
Mice ordinance.
Are we gonna leash the mice?
Well,
We probably have a leash for them. They
So-
should be leashed.
of the reports that we see here, and this is what I got. That's the information I got to work off of. I'm going to tell you when people say that it's a little bit inflammatory because it's non-specific and that kind of thing. I know it's not accurate because it's underreported. Because how many times do friends or family get bit or injured at someone else's house and you don't want to report it because you don't need to go, you know, want to put your friend through the problem.
Sometimes
So,
they deserve it.
well, if
Especially
they
if it's
do.
friends or family and they've had too much to drink at your Thanksgiving party.
You might feed them to them sometimes too. But I think the way we have it set up, I believe it's January 8th is the first reading on this thing, and that's when the public will be able to weigh in with comments, and the thing will be lined out in its entirety. We got two issues right here, like the judge was talking about, the off-leash times and loose in the front yard. And just, you know, when we started this thing, not being able to stick your head out the window of a car. The intent was that you can walk through a parking lot and get to your car without being bit as you're walking by, not that you couldn't drive on the highway or down the road with your dog sticking its head out the window. So that's been changed. There's been a lot of changes like that where sometimes you got in your head exactly what you want it to look like, but it translates out differently. But I think we need to address the off-leash times and the front yard loose and the off-leash. I mean, I've had a lot of comments on that too. So, yeah, and I had one guy tell me that if you're going to do that in a park, designate a couple parks to do that at certain times, and then then it would be. We have 2 dog parks. Was the point? So I don't know. What are the?
Does anybody know how many dogs there are in Casper, approximately? Do you have any wild guess about it?
No, and you can't go off licensing, and I don't even know the licensing off the top of my head, but I would guess that, you know, not
Do we have
even-
10,000, do you think?
Oh, I would say we have a lot more than 10,000.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
We actually have 3 dog parks that are off leash
What's the third one?
by the
Oh,
house.
I was thinking of the ones that we own. There's that one that
Yeah.
Platte River's Trust owns.
Yep.
And we do have citizens that want to walk their dogs in the park and throw the ball.
And you have the entire county.
You got the entire county. You got 200.
It's only 15
Well,
minutes away.
You know,
Go ahead, Mike.
we don't exactly have the entire county, because the countywide leash law, in a few ways, is a little bit more restrictive than what our current city leash law is.
Would be
And so, you know, people really can't just take their dogs out and run them loose out in the county. Number one, but number two, I think it's important, somebody mentioned that, you know, when we're talking about animal safety and everything, we're talking about safety for the animal, so that the animal doesn't run out into the street and get hit, doesn't go charging up to another animal that might not be in a welcoming mood and might, you know, bite it or something like that. And we're also talking about the dog that just goes running up and knocks somebody over, or somebody that's scared that the dog's gonna knock them over or anything. My dog can walk up and knock you over with her tail. But I think that we really need to keep that in mind. We're not just talking about bites and that kind of thing, but we are talking about those things. And we're talking about protecting the safety of the animals too, so that they don't get out in the street and get hurt and all that kind of thing. The other thing that I want to say about breeds, in my experience, the pit bulls and Rottweilers that I've ever been around in my life have been the nicest, friendliest, just great dogs. And Dallas, you asked how many dogs there are in town. I would just say how many houses are there, and multiply that by probably 1.5 or 2, and that's how many dogs we
Quite a
got,
few.
really, because it's just just walking, going door to door, everybody's got at least one dog.
But the main issue is controlling the dog's leash,
Yeah, well,
period.
properly confining.
Which I think takes us to our next
Yeah.
part of it when we're talking about it, and I think Chris brought it up, is that we're looking at 2 main issues, I think, that sounds like what I'm hearing from council, unless anybody else has any other issues they want to bring up from what John just read us. But off-leash times and front yard seems to be the 2 issues, sticking points for council. If I'm wrong, you guys can correct me.
I think they're,
So if we look at those 2, I guess, so we can start looking at moving forward and giving some direction for the city, what do we want to, I guess what would the council's pleasure be, I suppose? Sean?
I would like to see all animals leashed in public other than designated dog parks.
How's everybody feel about that, I guess? Can you get an idea?
say that again, except in the designated.
Excepting designated dog parks, where they're designated to be allowed off leash, but anywhere else in public, they should be leashed.
Charlie?
And I agree with that, and I'm trying to think about the idea of having 2 or 3 other parks that might just have off-leash for a prescribed period of time. I agree it makes it more complicated, but I don't know, I'm trying to think how that would work. And if that would, then people would know if they've got a problem with dogs or they've got little kids, and they would just know, I've gotta go to a different park that early in the morning. I don't know, I'm willing to think about that.
Yeah, if we're gonna say that we wanna have more dog parks, I'd prefer that we say, okay, this park will be a dog park all the time.
Right.
If you wanted to say Adams Park, City Park, whatever park, so that it's clear that
Like have certain.
here's a dog park, here's one, and here's one. And,
Mr. Mayor?
Yeah.
Since this vote is more than 34 days away, the gentleman that won my seat is behind me, and he has some ideas, he's gonna vote on it. I don't know whether the council wants to hear from the person who's gonna be on the council and vote on it or not, so I just thought I'd ask the council what their feelings were.
Sure. Council, it's up to council. Do we want to hear? Which I did a very good job of not introducing, but Councilwoman-elect Lutz is here, as well as Councilman-elect Bates is here.
Do they have any ideas?
They're gonna
Yeah,
vote
go
on
ahead.
it, might as well let them say something.
Kristen, do you have anything?
I mean, I obviously have young children, so I'm highly sensitive to having a young child around a dog that I don't know in a public area, but I haven't looked at the data and the statistics, so I don't know that that's really, I mean, that's probably a concern as a mother, I don't know that that's a concern as like far as like general public. But no, I think Sean's on there.
Stan, do you have anything?
I do. I loved walking down PV Park. There's neighbors, fence runs across. They open their gate. They let about 5 dogs out right by the fence, throw frisbees, balls, back and forth. 30 minutes later, they put them back in the fence. There's another gentleman that goes out there with his little pup, throws the ball, brings it back. Love watching it. Love hanging out. My kids love it. I got 3 girls. They like watching it as well. Don't mess with the dogs because we teach them don't mess with other people's dogs unless you have permission. I think the parks, designated parks for designated times, I think is a great idea. It allows the opportunity for those that want it certain times, but I don't think it should be all the time. As she put, if somebody wants to take their kids, they don't want to worry about the dogs. So I like the time thing. I don't care for the no dog leash on the walk path, river walk. I think it should be still leashed. I agree with that. Fenced in, I got, in my opinion, around PV, I walk my dog on leash all over PV. Anybody that's seen him knows my dog, Newfoundland Black. You can't miss my dog. But seeing other people's dogs just sitting there on the grass, hanging out, obeyed by command, word of command, I don't see an issue, and I do think it comes into telling property owners that they have to have a fence in order for your dog to be in the front yard. No, it's my property. I pay the taxes. I bought it. No, if my dog is good enough to sit out there, I shouldn't have to leash him. I shouldn't have to, he should be allowed on my property. He goes off my property, call the cops, have him detained, that's fine. I agree with that. He walks one step off. Great, that's fine by me, but as long as he's on my property, leave my dog alone, honestly.
Where's the real deal Freel-Aid in here?
So we've got, it sounds to me like dogs, well, Sean's thing, but do we want to designate certain parks for certain times?
You have something to say about that?
If I could, I think that's a great question, and from a practical standpoint, I think if I could just offer a suggestion, if you leave parks to be even temporarily applied as a dog park, they're going to become a dog park. People are going to not heed the times, and eventually you're just going to have dogs running everywhere and so forth. My recommendation would be that if you want to expand the options for dogs, then we just take the step of creating an additional dog park, fence it like you do over at McKenzie, and make it an additional dog park. I think the time thing is confusing, and ultimately it'll just become a dog park anyway.
I agree with that.
Mr. Mayor?
I got Chris, and then I'll have you, Dallas.
So everything that's green up here is a park, right?
Yeah.
On the map.
Could be improved or unimproved. Well, those are annexation islands, I believe.
They say parks.
Oh, do they? Okay. All right.
So, we've got a few. You think about, we do have, there's 3 dog parks. That other one's pretty small over here by the river, so I don't know. So why don't we go with Sean's, have it on a leash, and decide which parks we're gonna cut out pieces of to have some dog parks, because, you know, if you live in an apartment, you live in a place where there is no yard, it's nice to go out and play with your dog. So, I guess instead of trying to look at it, when me and Mr. Henley were talking about it, it's, you know, people go out and play with their dog before and after work, and that's no big deal, but of course, it absolutely can be, depending on when they come into what contact could be. So if we designated some more areas where you could go to in different areas around the town so that it's not cumbersome, not overly expensive for us. We don't have to make them nice. They can always be built and expanded, but we allow some options.
Dallas, Mike, Sean.
The one thing I do notice, Carter, is the signs we have in parks are very weak. I would like to see, like over there where I live, Nance English Park, it has drawings, and so you need a big sign that says, dogs have to be leashed. It's an ordinance, like warning ordinances, and have them strategically placed so when people go in there, they know
what it is, because when I go there occasionally, when couple dogs have got wrapped up with him and they weren't on a leash, and I got upset with the people and said, you know, it's law, you gotta have these leashed. And so, I can't say, go read the sign. I prefer to say, just go read the sign on the dog leash law. And, cause I don't wanna be the policeman out there. And so I hope that there's proper signage around town at these parks especially, but you're right, Carter, but these parks are already dog parks. They already are. It's not that they're gonna become a dog park, they are a dog park. And so it's just now a matter of controlling it and being, and I agree
There's
with you.
signs on, I don't know if it's on all the parks, I know that it's on some of them, it says dogs must be leashed or under control.
It's not
And
on-
our current ordinance says they must be leashed or under control, and under control means reasonable voice commands at a reasonable level where, you know, depending on the volume of voice that you use. So right now, they don't have to be leashed. It says leashed or under control, but then that under control part is voice command. And I'm gonna tell you, oh yeah, my dog always comes back to me. Was that 5 times I call him back, absent, going after the picnic chicken, or, so it's not enforced because it turned into, I can just tell you from a lifetime of having these things come up, you don't enforce it if you get an ordinance where you go up and say, okay, were all these bases covered? No, I can't answer it, and it never even goes and sees a court.
But your ordinance is gonna say they have to be leashed if they're in public, right? And that's what should be.
Yes, and then under control, Mr. Henley's got it drafted where that means it's on a leash or it's in a carrier. It's not
Well, it's
voice
gotta have a
command.
person on the other end of it.
Not voice, yes, there's a physical
That's-
control on the animal.
That's what
so-
should be done. So what he's saying, I'm assuming that's what's in there. That
Yeah.
dog, if that dog is in public, that dog needs to be leashed. I wasn't, but I wanna make sure that's clear because
It's-
I think
it's what's
that's
in
very
there.
important. Just cause you've been on the council 25 years, you've been the mayor 10 times, you don't need to rag me tonight.
Mike.
It seems that we're kind of talking about making one or more additional dog parks in town. Looking at the map of city parks, I've never understood why, especially the area north of Events Drive, south of Amico Road, and east of North Poplar, I think it is down there, why that isn't a dog park. Because that's one of the biggest, openest areas in town, and a dog could go down there and do almost anything that a dog could think of to do and not really, you know, not really cause a problem. And there's those little puddles there, and people want their dogs to get wet and smell, they could do that. So I would suggest that we carve off that area up there, make that a dog park. The other thing that I would suggest is that, I don't think we'd have to fence that or do anything. I think that could be done with signage and because it's sufficiently remote and that. The other thing that I would suggest is that we take the, all or a portion of the area of City Park that is west of Center Street, south of 7th Street, north of what was the old Board of Public Utilities building there, fence all or a portion of that and make that a dog park there for the middle part of town. Just looking out there to the southeast part of town, I see a nice square park out there somewhere. It looks like it's around Elkhorn Edition or somewhere there. I guess it's west of Wyoming Boulevard. Make all or a portion of that a dog park, because if you go to other towns, you'll see a half a block or a block sized areas where they'll have a little fence and all that. And I know there's some expense in building fences that says dog park, and there's a little gate that you have to go through to get in there and everything. And I think that'd be kind of nice to do that. I wouldn't have any problem with that. But again, I think that if you're not in one of those designated areas, that dog needs to be properly and restrained. Because I worry as much about the dog just knocking somebody over as I do about biting them. I don't know about anybody else, but I've known several people that have suffered broken bones just because the dog trips them or knocks them over.
Sean.
I think carving out dog parks should be a separate work session topic. The city staff should come to us with suggestions, because we'll be here all night doing that. But I think right now it should say, and if everybody's in agreement, that they need to be leashed, except for designated dog parks, and then the designated dog parks we can designate later, with the suggestion of the city staff.
Yep.
Yeah. Good, Rick.
We can do that.
Good. Carter, do you have something you want?
That's exactly what I was gonna suggest. We can do a little homework and bring back some proposals.
Good deal.
If I may, we
Yes.
still need to discuss Mike's concern about the front yard.
That was the next part that I was going to say.
And I just
Front
have a
yard.
problem with people feeling like they have to walk across the street because they don't know. You may know, it's, you know, the dog may have no history of aggression, but why should someone have to wonder? The sidewalks should be safe. So I think they should be fenced.
Yeah, but
I
every
agree
time
with
I
you.
cross the street, I wonder if somebody's gonna run over me, because they don't slow down
So-
for our walkways either. I mean, I could be afraid of everything, Charlie.
Well,
You can wire it up,
we
but
got
I,
712 incidents that says people have some reason to be afraid. I think if I got my number right.
and there's probably
So-
more, actually.
And there's probably more than that. So I'm coming down on the fence.
But wouldn't it be though if the dog leaves the property? Are we talking about if a dog is on their property, its front yard, and they're just barking at you, versus if the dog is charging at you and it comes off the property, then it's still the responsibility of the owner. I mean, I think they're. I mean, I'm kind of
If it
thinking.
comes off the property charging at you, and it doesn't have to it doesn't have to attack you.
It
but
just makes it
present an
aggressive.
attack posture, that runs foul of the law, so that could be addressed.
But we're
Do
saying
we
they.
care if the dog stays in its own yard? We only care if it does something that would cause a person to be hurt. I mean, I'm scared if there's a fence and the big dog barks and runs towards the fence. That scares me a little bit, because you wonder, can the dog get over the fence? But this is how we live in Wyoming. But the only time we really have a problem is if there's a violation and somebody gets bit. That's. when
How
it
about,
gets-
well, what if we leave it so that, as it's written right now, and monitor our problem? We can put a fence up requirement if we see it becoming an issue.
Is the fence requirement in there now?
No, not in the front yard.
I would, if I had a vote, I would leave it that way, Charlie, because think about it. It's just an enforcement problem. That's all we're really talking about ultimately. It's an enforcement problem. People aren't even gonna pay attention to this ordinance, but if their dog gets out and something happens, the police write them the ticket based upon what happened. The dog went out of the front yard, bit the guy in the leg walking by on the sidewalk. There's no policeman gonna get involved, running around, and he sees a guy's dog, his collie looking out, and the little boy playing with the ball in their front yard with no fence. Nobody's gonna write a ticket for that.
Well, I have thought about it.
But it's not gonna happen.
And I just think an 80-year-old couple should be able to walk on the sidewalk and not have to scan each house to say, is there a loose dog there that might hurt us?
Didn't know you were 80.
Go ahead,
I can
Mike.
tell you, when I take my great-grandson out in his stroller, 4-month-old kid, we walk on the other side of the block if there are dogs there.
And that's probably a good idea.
Yeah.
Well, it's probably a
shouldn't
good
have to.
idea, but should they have to? And, you know.
Well, even with a fence, I would do it.
That's-
Well,
In
that's
some
what I mean.
instances.
Well, the fence
Okay,
can be
but-
about 3 feet anyway.
I got Mike next on the
Yeah,
docket.
but-
Go ahead. Go ahead, Mike.
But my point is that, you know, I don't think the cops are gonna go out and drive up and down the street and start arresting people for their dogs sitting in their
No, they're
front
not
yard.
gonna do that.
But if the neighbors sit there and they call and they say, you know, this dog's out in the front yard and it acts barky and menacingly or whatever, and well, nothing we can do about it because it hasn't left its yard and it hasn't bitten anybody yet and all that stuff. I just don't, you know, I don't agree with that. I think that
So you want
people-
everybody in the city to build a fence in their front yard, really?
If they wanna have their dog out in the front yard, yeah,
I,
because I think otherwise,
all
how
due
do you
respect,
know the
ex
dog
judge,
will-
I think that's a preposterous idea. It's too expensive and it isn't fair to our citizens.
walking.
If they get out of the yard, they can be arrested and dealt with and given 6 months in jail and a $750 fine, and you've got them. But to say
Walking
everybody
is-
in town has to build a fence in their front yard, I think is ridiculous and shouldn't be done.
Walking as much as I have around town, 99% of the people don't have their dogs sitting out in the front yard. You know, I can't tell you when I think walking all around, I've seen one dog in recent years.
Right, and
sitting
they
in
don't
the
want them
front
running
yard.
off.
They don't want them running off. But still, I'm just sensitive, you know, like Charlie says, if people want to walk down the sidewalk, I don't think they should have to worry about what's that. Is that a good dog, or is that a bad dog, or is that even that dog's yard? Or is that a
You
dog
don't
that
even
came
have a
from
front
clear
fence
over
on
there?
your yard, Judge.
No, but I don't ever let my dog out in the front yard either.
Well, but if he got out of the cage, didn't he get out one time?
Not this dog. About
So-
15 years ago, but yeah.
So-
I think we're beating a dead dog.
Yeah.
Chris, what was your thought, Chris, you said again?
Why don't you just, well, do nothing, leave it as it stands now, which means it can be under voice command in your front yard. See if it becomes a problem, we can add to it, or it can be, have a fence or have it tethered in your front yard. I can see both sides of the story, or the argument real easy.
I like your idea. Play
Sean?
it by
The
ear.
one
and
thing
see
about
what's really
fences in the
problem.
front yard though is they're ineffective because you can't build a fence over 3 feet high in your front yard.
And when you have a dog like mine,
And when you got a dog like that, or a German Shepherd, or any large-sized dog, they're gonna jump over that thing like it's not even there.
Well, I used to have a dog that jumped 8-foot fence.
So,
Well, they can be tethered in the front yard.
But
too,
yeah.
if you- with them.
so I mean, even with a 3-foot fence in your front yard, I still don't see that as adequate.
Yeah.
So maybe the suggestion that Chris is presenting is that we leave it as is, and then if we continue to have that problem or issue, we reevaluate that.
That's a good idea. I like that.
Well, I think that what I'm
We'll go
advocating for is to go back to the language that Chris had, that the dog either has to be adequately fenced or tethered. And I think, I would just say anywhere on the owner's property. I don't want to speak for Charlie, but I think that we're kind of saying that. I don't know if I'm the only guy that feels that way, that's fine, I'll concede the point and we'll move on.
Go ahead, Charlie.
The statistic we'll never have is how many people don't go walking in their neighborhood because. We'll never know that. But it's more than zero. And that's not right. For people to stay home because they don't feel safe on our sidewalks.
But it's not right to make every citizen in Casper buy a fence around their yard because one 80-year-old couple can't walk across the street and avoid the dog. I mean, it's just human common sense and decency that we're talking about here. People have to use common sense.
Mr. Mayor, can I ask the attorney?
You bet.
Mr. Attorney, does the tethering issue require a fence, or is tethering adequate in the ordinance?
It would be adequate, but there's a limitation on that, it's 2 hours of tethering. You max, and you have to be within visual observation.
You just couldn't tie them up and leave them there for 9 hours.
Right,
And
right.
2
During the
hours
day,
is too
yeah, you
long.
can't- you have to work and
Tether.
tether.
In most of our land.
Well, and I'll wait till Sean comes back from the restroom. I mean, we can take to see the support from the council if we would want to keep the language as is, or if we look at wanting to do either fenced or tethered, to change that, to see what.
I move we continue this matter until 35 days from today, and all the new people can address it. Seriously, that's what you're gonna do. We're just expressing opinions, and I think actually they've finally done the right thing. But to put a fence around your yard in the whole city of Casper is an extreme, and I don't think, if you really think it out, that's what anybody wants to do, is
I
impair the
think we
rest of
could
the
appoint
citizens.
Citizen Dallas Laird as a special master to handle all animal matters.
I'll be happy to come down and do it free of charge.
So let's. I heard that. Is there support to keep the language as is?
For 34 days.
The language
You got
as is
that
meaning,
support, don't you?
On the front yard.
On the front yard with voice command, and what was
Ms.
it,
Lutz,
Chris?
are
I'm
you
sorry.
for that?
That's it.
She's
Yeah,
got her
just voice
thumb
command.
up.
no, I'm
Yeah.
against that. I'm against comments that I think they should be tethered or behind a fence, and you're right, the fence is not gonna be adequate for most dogs. So, use your backyard.
Use your backyard, and there's still the provision in here that, you know, if people are being intimidated by a dog in the front yard, there can be consequences. You can't, it isn't listed where it's a non-vicious, non-dangerous.
I think there were at most 2, if not maybe 3, that think that they should be confined in the front yard, so it seems to me like.
You're gonna have people,
the boss,
seriously,
and so
who
let's
are
move
afraid if they
on.
see a cat. You can't control all these aberrational issues.
I think we have a consensus, so
Yeah,
let's move
okay.
on.
Good idea.
So, is there anything else that we need to address, John?
You know, I guess what I would just say
That's a
is
judge
the
comment. Let's move
ordinance
on.
that we want to present to council when we present this, for first reading public hearing, I think it's kind of important that we have kind of a draft and not red line. So I would, look for a thumbs up. This ordinance that we're looking at tonight, with the changes, with the exception of that addressing the hours in parks, and that they be out in public, they have to be under leash or some type of tethered control. And then the question will remain, I guess we'll leave it as is with respect to the front yard, so that'll just kind of continue as it is. So maybe a thumbs up on that so that we can finalize this and have it ready for your attention.
Could we still put the line numbers on it just so we can refer to the spots? That would be
Yeah,
helpful.
I suspect this.
Do you have something to say, Charlie?
And I
Thank you.
agree with Sean that we should have a work session where we talk about some other areas that where dogs could be unleashed.
And how we're gonna finance it.
And how we're gonna finance it, what's it gonna cost.
I think Carter's got that down for a work session.
Okay.
Absolutely, you bet. Thank you, John.
Thank you.
I know you're next on something else here too, John. 6-cent funding.
Mr. Mayor, if I remember correctly, the council wanted to hear the statutory requirements with regard to 6-cent funding. And so we have looked at the statutes. Mr. Henley prepared a memo that I think has been delivered to the council. And we're prepared to tell you what the statutes say and go from there.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, Council, Mr. Napier. The 6-cent tax is really known as the special purpose excise tax, it's SECT. And it's for one-time type of purposes or projects. And they give options of constructing something, whether it be a road or a fire station, things of that nature. It won't be an ongoing source of funding, and it's not for ordinary operations. There may be some ordinary operations, say you wanted to buy a big piece of equipment out of the bale field or something. And so part of that would be, we have to learn how to run that big piece of equipment. That would be maybe an ordinary funding that you could use some of the SECT money for, but pretty narrow as far as ordinary operations to use this money. There were 10 counties who have recently passed this, and that was in one of the attachments. Most of those are kind of smaller counties. I assume that's because they don't have a large sales tax base. A lot of their population would go to the Walmart over in Cheyenne or Laramie or Casper or the like. And so some of the smaller towns have actually adopted that more readily than the larger towns. So to actually have this go though, and be a source of revenue, you have to have voter approval, the majority of those voters who are voting. But before you get there, you have to have the concurrence of the counties. In Natrona County, you would have to do that. And in this particular county, you'd have to have 4 of the 6 municipalities, also their governing bodies, adopt resolutions. And those resolutions have to be specific as to the purpose or the project that's going to be ongoing. And so it's kind of a large hurdle there to do all of that. Before the vote of the approval though, so even before you go to the municipalities, you have to have the thing well defined is what you want to do. And that includes the amount of money that you need to raise, because that's one of the things that has to go on the ballot, the voters get to vote on. So we want to buy a new piece of bale field equipment, and the cost of that's going to be, $10 million or whatever, and that's got to be out there. And then you have to go and you get your approval from the county as well as the other municipalities. And if they all pass the resolutions, well, then you have to get it, and you have to let the county clerk know that we have to have this special election, or we want this on one of your primary or general elections. And in that regard, again, there's a long waiting period. If you're looking for the August or November dates, you have to give 110 days written notice, which includes basically the wording that you want on the ballot before any of those dates. If it's a May election that you're seeking, you have to give the county clerk notice by March 1. So there's a lot of hurdles there. It's a possibility. It's been done in 10 of the 23 counties that I know of, and maybe it's been more than that. And attached to the memo I gave you, you saw some of the specific proposals on how that was arranged, and whether they were looking for a new fire station, or whether they were looking for a new parking garage or fleet command center. So that is an option for you to consider, or for the new council to consider, because it won't happen readily. I'm happy to take any questions you have.
Well,
Yeah, there's one other issue that came up the last time we tried SBET. When does it actually expire? And I think statutorily, the way it happens, that you have to raise the money. If you're gonna raise $10 million, it will expire at the end of the next quarter. So there is a window in there that some of that money will still accrue. And that was a sticking point for some people, but just so everybody's aware that that's the way it gets shut down.
Charlie?
Just
You
to
mean
com-
it could go on for 5 years?
I don't think the terms are limited, it's the amount that's limited. But once you raise the amount, it expires, once you've got that amount, it expires at the end of the next quarter.
Just a comment, I mean, the police station would be an ideal thing to put before the public to see if in fact people wanted to see that built. Problem is, what incentive does Evansville or Mills or the county have in Casper building a new police station? And that's why WHAM has a resolution
That's the one.
allowing municipalities the authority to implement local option sales tax within defined local boundaries. So that we could say, this would just be a Casper thing. And we wouldn't need to, because it's really for the citizens of Casper, and if I lived in Evansville, why would I vote for Casper to build a new police station? So it's set up in state law to make it very difficult to do this kind of thing. And so I hope we can make some progress on that, because to me it makes sense for Casper to be able to say to its citizens, you guys want to pay for this or not? And if the answer is no, we'll fumble along the best we can. But if the answer is yes, we don't need the votes of all the people that are outside of Casper.
Dallas?
When I heard that, my thought was, it's just like that consensus money that we all divvied up. Remember, we wanted it all, and then they wanted part of it, and we did divvy it up. So maybe that's the way this should be handled. You go to all of the entities that we need to have approve this and find out what they need as well, and make the deal where that you get your money from Mills and Evansville and the county and the city of Casper, and they sign off. And
That's how Cheyenne passed it.
That's kinda what
that's
Cheyenne
how you
did.
would have to do it, because they all have needs, I know that. You just can't hog the whole money, you gotta share it with your neighbors. And
Or
that's
see
what
if we can be successful.
Yeah.
This is important.
It's
It is
passed
important.
twice, it's passed twice in the state. It's passed once in Sweetwater County, and it's passed once in Cheyenne, I think.
Mike and then Chris.
But it's failed a lot of times.
Yes, it has.
I think that the idea of going to Mills, Evansville, Vernon, or the county and saying, well, okay, do you have a specific project in mind that's meritorious? Because, you can't Christmas tree these things up too much, because then they just become such a conglomeration that people can't understand them. I know, when they went to the voters for a 6th cent to spend $11 million to build a new courthouse, which would have included a 2-story parking structure, and that was voted down because of a lot of reasons that I considered to be very uninformed. Instead of getting a new courthouse with a 2-story parking structure for $11 million, the last price tag that I heard was $29 million for converting the Townsend Hotel. And so, the nice thing about these things is that, if you can finance it, you can finance it, get it done. The tax ends when the project is financed. It's not just a keep going forever kind of a tax. But if you do decide to do this, it's gotta, I think it has to be really, really narrowly defined and well marketed a lot better than what that one was. You know, virtually with door-to-door campaigning and that kind of thing going on, because otherwise, you know, you're gonna end up with the naysayers running around, and you know, and that 29 million could have been spent for a lot of different things in this county, and than just doing that.
Chris?
Do we have a purpose for discussing this? Do we have a project associated with it?
I originally brought it up as a way to get money for school safety.
Okay.
When I first got on the council, I mentioned it, and then it's apparently roiled around and brought up today. Surprised me too.
All right.
Any other questions for John? Thanks, John. Next up is the legislative agenda.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. This is a time of year where I come to you and appeal to you for direction with regard to an agenda that you would like us to promote and actively support among our legislative team, and more broadly with the legislature, particularly in regards to the legislative season, which is upon us. You'll recall last year that as a result of the direction you gave last year, we kind of kicked that off with a dinner that we had with the legislative delegation locally, and equipped them with the information that you see in front of you. You're looking at the 2018 handout, if you will, that we provided to our legislative delegation. We hope to do something similar for the 2019 session. And that dinner, as a matter of fact, is coming up on the 6th. Thank you, 6th. And we'll, of course, pending tonight's discussion, present what the legislative priorities for this group is. There's a number of things that I would like to go over with you, just to be sure that I understand your priorities. And then there's a portion dedicated to local government financing that I think will probably take somewhat of a protracted discussion that I'd like to get your direction on tonight as well. So with regard to a couple of the smaller yet also important items that we've talked about and I've tried to take note on, so that indeed we could talk about as much as we need to this evening before we go into the revenue side. You'll notice in your memo that we provided over the weekend, we touched base on a number of these things. Number one, the stormwater legislation that seeks to allow municipalities to create an enterprise to manage stormwater and its operation. That bill did come out of committee yesterday, and it looks like it's ready to go to the floor. The basic idea being that the option for municipalities to create an enterprise to manage, operate, and extend where necessary a stormwater utility is basically the idea that has garnered support so far. The other piece of legislation that has come out of committee and is moving forward to the floor is with regard to municipalities having the opportunity to create special districts, which is a power that counties enjoy right now, but cities and towns do not. The idea being that not only would special districts be created to generate improvements, which, as you know, local assessment districts kind of looks like that. This would also include the opportunity to provide for services that a municipality can not provide in its current fashion, or could provide, or does not provide on an enhanced basis that a particular portion of the community might want to pay for and provide basically on their own. The idea that comes to mind for me is with regard to snow plowing, for example. If a particular part of our community said, hey, we want enhanced snow plowing, it's my impression that this legislation would allow for that part of the community to do that, if indeed they're willing to pay for those costs that are associated with that type of service. And so this legislation, should it survive the legislative process coming up, would allow municipalities to do that kind of thing. The other thing that I think we should push our delegation to consider legislation for is with regard to school safety. To me, every municipality in the state of Wyoming ought to be considering ways in which they can provide school resource officer services to their respective campuses in their communities. I think that is a new norm. I think it's something that every town needs to be considering and planning for if they're not currently. If you didn't see the information that was presented through the media on our sister town of Gillette recently, you should take a look at that and appreciate the efforts that have been made here in Casper to improve that presence here in our community. My suggestion is, and I would hope that you would agree, the state ought to have some skin in that game and should help to provide school safety where cities and towns are being burdened nearly by themselves. We are kind of lucky here in Natrona County that the school district has partnered up and have been willing to provide quite a bit of money to make that happen. That is not a given throughout our state. It's not happening in many municipalities, and in fact, it might surprise you how little that partnership of that nature exists throughout the state of Wyoming. I think that with the right legislation, those kinds of partnerships can exist, they should exist, and the state should be a partner in that. The other thing that I've heard you talk about that we would suggest ought to be a part of your agenda would be with regard to the weaknesses that exist in the current system overseen by the state on our behalf as it relates to collections and payments of sales taxes. I have the unfavorable distinction of having gone through an overpayment situation 2 times, one here and one in a previous community. And neither time did the state or the vendor take any responsibility or any of the burden with regard to the financial difficulties that each of those scenarios provided. My opinion is, and I hope it's yours too, that the state and the vendors should be held to a higher bar, and they should have a higher responsibility and accountability as it relates to making sure those kinds of things don't happen. And when they do, I think the city and the town or the county should not be the only ones that bear that burden of appropriate repayment. I'm hopeful that we can put some legislation together that would raise the bar for the state and raise the bar for the vendors, and hopefully disincentivize mistakes that are horribly costly for cities and towns and counties.
In regard to that, there's a real problem with the state's secrecy laws. And I don't think that anybody has wanted to address that. And I was hoping we would talk to our contingents about that. I've talked to them about it personally, and they didn't even know what the problem was. And here's the problem. There are many businesses that deal in cash. And we have no clue about the reporting. You can't get a comparison for what they did this year compared to a date last year. So, and what I've noticed in other communities, businesses that are now going to only accepting cash. They have an ATM machine, and they'll only take cash. Now, anybody can think through this, but what happened on our problem with the Solvay company in Green River is there's a provision in the statute that says if I call down there and talk to Mr. Noble, he can't tell me who that person was.
Right.
And if they want to stop that from happening, they need to change that law, allow the management office in the cities to get who these big taxpayers are, because you don't worry about so-and-so's little cafe downtown too much. But if we would have known Solvay International is paying tax through Natrona County, and their address is Green River, Wyoming, we could call up and say, wait a minute, why is this coming through here, and would have stopped at the first month. But we had no way of knowing. And you still don't know, how do we know we're getting the right amount of money? Ever. We don't. We have no way of saying, let us see the data upon which this is based, see if we're even getting our fair share here. And we need to be able to find that out, Carter. And I think they need to overhaul that. And I think that there's guys in our legislative contingency that are ready to do something about it. I talked to Eli Bebout about it, and he didn't realize it. He says, oh, we need a letter, we need something, we need to look in and get that straightened out. I says, you know, this has hurt Casper. And it will hurt anybody. And what you've already said about making people responsible for their own mistakes. This is a case where we didn't make a mistake, and we're the ones who suffered, period. I don't like that feeling at all. And so however you present that, we have to be able to protect ourselves from how do we know we're collecting the right sales taxes here? And we don't if people are dealing in cash. And I don't know what the answer to that is, but when I was in Maui, we go up to this restaurant, and the way they do it there, you get in a line, you go through the line, there's an ATM machine, they only accept cash, so people get their cash, they go around, give the guy the order, pay him the cash, go and sit down, and then they bring you your food. Pretty slick operation.
Go ahead, Charlie.
Carter, you made a pitch to Legislative Leadership Committee of WHAM about this matter. Did you get a positive response?
Mr. Mayor and Councilman, I did. They certainly indicated that they agreed and would support legislative efforts to see this thing through.
So there's a need to
This
come
idea.
up with some language and get someone to sponsor a draft. So that would be the next step forward. I don't know how that's going to happen. There wasn't any discussion about how someone would actually get a legislative draft together on this.
Mr. Mayor, Councilman, there's a number of ways. The typical way is a particular sponsor would take it up in committee. We're kind of beyond that point at this point in time. But that doesn't mean that an individual sponsor can't ask the Legislative Services Office to draft some language that would be brought forward as a draft on an individual sponsor's behalf. Oftentimes what you see is that sponsor will get other co-sponsors that would help bring some buoyancy to the idea and potentially draw some attention and attraction for others to get on board and make it happen.
So maybe on the 6th we could ask if someone was willing
You
to
bet.
take the lead on this thing. Because it has to happen pretty quickly.
What I think we should do, it won't cost us much money, we hire somebody to draft the legislation. Because most of the old legislators I knew, I'd say, well, we need a law that extends the statute of limitations on sexual predators. They said, well, give me a bill and we'll put it in for you. So I drafted the bill and put it in, and it became law. But if everybody sits around and you send them a letter or a note, nobody gets up and drafts a statute or an ordinance because they don't know how to do it. So we need to find somebody who knows how to do it, draft our legislation. I guarantee you we'll make more progress than you could ever believe if we take it upon ourselves to hand them the document.
I nominate
Here's the deal.
Dallas to do it.
I've got 34
Free
days
charge.
and I don't have time.
I guess I'd let the LSO do it, that's what they do for a living.
Go ahead, Bob.
But if they'll do it, but you can also do
You
it.
gotta have sponsors,
Yeah.
but you still gotta have a sponsor anyway.
Right, that's what we need.
Yeah,
I
you
would
have,
be-
you have a legislator sponsor.
Okay, I'm sorry, I just wanna address some of the issues that Dallas brought up. I would be very concerned about businesses having to bare their souls, so to speak, saying how much sales tax they paid to a given vendor. That puts one business that's competing with another one at a terrible disadvantage. The way big dollars are exchanged in big mining companies, you have to deliver that machine such and such a place. As I understand it, the sales tax dollars go to the point of delivery. And that's not my competitor's business to know how much I paid for a multi-million-dollar machine. And I think, Dennis, you've been in that business. And I'm not sure all the competitors would want to bare their souls, because they have rights as individuals. They are in fact considered a person under law. And I think the problem needs to be taken up by the state. They need to have something in their form that says, okay, you paid this much on this amount of money to this county. That's where the issue was. There's no contention by anybody out there that Solvay underpaid the taxes. The problem was it was paid to the wrong entity, and the state didn't catch it because of the way they keep their books. And that's the problem. It's not these evil companies out here. There are a lot of businesses, any service business, they don't even pay taxes. That would be a huge thing for us to pick up. If we had all the businesses that have exemptions from paying any sales tax, that would make a big dent in what happens in our sales tax. I'll get off my stump now.
But I agree with you, but I'm not saying that they publish their material. It stays confidential and it goes to the management office. The management office keeps it confidential so that we have a way of checking as to where this money's coming from, so we can catch it.
Well, and that's.
Gotta do something like
That's
that.
the state's job. We're paying them 1.5% of the whole pot.
And they're not
to
doing
do
the
that.
job.
And they're not doing their job. I agree.
Carter had a response that he needed to get.
A couple statements. I thought it was really interesting when we had Mr. Noble come, which I really appreciated him being there, to one of our meetings. He indicated that the software system doesn't have the capacity to run that quality control, if you will, which I can't imagine doesn't exist. I know that it does. We have a lot of vendors throughout the country who have plenty more vendors to follow and track than we do here in little old Wyoming. And so my feeling is the state needs to raise their bar and get the appropriate technology in place that helps avoid these kinds of things from happening again.
And they do that in the fuel business. Every time you go out and you're gonna pick up a load of fuel from Sinclair, if you're gonna deliver it to Carbon County or some other county or some other state, you have to put your code in there, and they know the tax to charge you because that's paid when you load your truck.
You bet.
So it's already there.
But presently, we don't have any way of knowing we're getting our due money or not.
Right.
We have no way of knowing.
Yeah.
We're just at the mercy
I've
of
had Mike
whatever.
waiting for a while, but I'm gonna get Charlie in real quick.
Well, I agree with everything you said, Bob, but to me, the real problem is there's no incentive for them to get it right.
Correct.
State.
No, the company. There's no incentive for the company to get it right. And so, this was not there was nothing malicious here. No one was trying to cause us a problem. It was just incompetence. And there was no consequences for that incompetence. And there needs to be.
Mike?
You're being kind on
I think that the thing that I hear Carter asking for is what are the items that we want to suggest to the legislature to try to fix this problem. I think that Dallas is onto something about this idea of some form of confidential reporting with a penalty if that confidence is broken, so that, you know, items over a certain level, you know, we'd be notified, okay, so and you know, and guarding the confidence that companies, I think, would want to have. I think that's a reasonable thing to ask. I think that as an absolute minimum, that you know, it was just completely astonishing to me that when they come and say, oh, well, you were overpaid, but we can't or won't tell you who it was that overpaid you. I think especially in one of those overpayment situations, that the aggrieved party should have the right to know who is it and when is it, and so that we can go back and look at this and double, triple check to make sure that we were in fact overpaid. I think that's an item that needs to be legislatively addressed. I think another item that needs to be legislatively addressed is what happens when there is one of these overpayments. You know, if I was king, and especially if I was dealing with somebody else's money, I would say, well, if you're innocently overpaid, you get to keep the money, and you know,
And they have to pay again, and that's the oversight.
Well,
They won't do it again.
yeah, so, you know, something like that. But I think that, you know, if we want to talk about an ideal wish list, that would be an ideal wish list thing to ask for.
If you're
Are we
king,
gonna
I
get
want you to
that?
put that in there.
Pardon?
We keep the
I
money
approve
and
the
they have to
agenda
pay
for the
again.
legislative update.
Yeah.
That'll stop that from ever happening again.
But you have to understand, there's a difference between what mine and minerals pay in taxes
yeah.
versus what we pay. They pay on 100% of the value on service tax. You and I only pay on 9.5% of the value of our property.
Well, I know there's a difference, but we have to have
A
this
factor of
so
10.
we can discover
Yeah.
mistakes and incompetence and stealing.
Yeah.
We just can't let it
And
keep
I think
happening.
that, those three items, I think would go a long ways towards solving this stuff. And I think that they're reasonable things that we can reasonably go to the legislature, get to keep the money, and that might be a little bit of a tough sell.
Right.
But I think that if you're an innocent party and all of a sudden you're being aggrieved by one of these at an absolute minimum, I would think that if they say you gotta pay this back, it gets to be a nice extended payment plan with zero interest and things like that. But,
6 months in jail and a $750 fine for the person who did it.
well,
That's what we do to people here. I want that done to them.
yeah, and I might not disagree too much with you on that, Dallas, and I think there does need to be an incentive in there, number one, for the state to get it right, also and equally for these tax-paying entities to get it right, because was this done with some devious intent by by Solvay, or was it done innocently but incompetently, or innocently in spite of their best efforts to do it the right way? And I think if it was done with a deviant intent, there should be punishment to it. If it was done incompetently, maybe there should be a lesser penalty to it. If it was done in spite of the best efforts, most reasonable total business-like practices, that's a different thing. But I think those are the things that we need to be talking to the legislature about with reference to that kind of an issue.
Correct.
I'd rather just see $1 million fine and leave it up to the judge as to what she wants to do.
Does the judge get a cut?
Whatever.
Charlie?
Carter, are we looking at a document that you're looking for approval for us to use on this as written? Is that kind of where we're looking?
What you're looking at is last year's document. The information that I gathered
I'm
tonight.
sorry, I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. That's okay. We just want to kind of
So
refresh
that's
your
right.
memory as to where we went last
Okay.
year.
Yeah, and
Not only from a topic
I wondered why I
standpoint.
wasn't here if I got to go home now.
Right, yeah. So what I need tonight is your blessing on the topics that we would use to populate this document, the agenda, and then that would give me the marching orders I need to promote with our legislative team, excuse me. I do have a couple more things that I want to be sure you're comfortable with. I think I hear what you're saying on the state taxing system. I do think that those penalties ought to be used to offset the amount that is being, retracted, so that indeed it doesn't just go back into the state's general fund and then other cities and towns have to pay it all without any of that burden being lifted. A couple other things. I would like to see legislation, if you guys are in agreement, that would allow for cities and towns to be part of the state's health insurance plan. It does require legislation for cities and towns to be brought into that mix like it did for school districts a number of years ago.
That's a good one.
I'm hopeful that we can kind of follow the resolution that WHAM put together there and throw in our support on that regard. The last thing before we start talking about funding, we are in a situation where, because of our proactive efforts over the last number of years to protect Wyoming's waterways in our area, have gone through a number of investments on Cindy's and Andrew's side of the river, if you will, to proactively deal with investments and projects and so forth that the state has historically said they would reimburse us for. Because again, it's their waterways we're trying to protect and keep pure. Where they can't reimburse us, however, they've been able to establish a series of credits that would promise us future reimbursement, if you will, to keep us whole and to keep those investments, to try to encourage those investments to come forward. we're at the point now where we would like to bring those credits back into our use so that we can continue these investments on what I would consider a proactive basis. The problem is with regard to the legislation that's out there now and the lack of funding that's in the fund that would allow for these credits to be either reimbursed or the projects to be able to come forward more freely is inadequate. And so what's happening is projects are getting prioritized over where we should be, particularly when we don't have the funds necessary to fund all the projects that make sense to protect Wyoming's waterways. We are trying to call the credits. That doesn't happen because the legislature is like, we don't got any money to refund your credits. We're proposing two things for the legislature to consider. One, adequately funding the landfill remediation fund that would allow for us to claim those credits and make these projects happen. Or two, change the legislative language that allows for the DEQ to provide those kinds of judgments, if you will, that would allow for those credits to be collected locally and again get those projects underway. Either would be fine with us. I think it would probably serve the state more appropriately if the landfill remediation fund were adequately funded. That's probably a tall order, given that number is probably in the neighborhood of 45 to 50 million or whatever. But we do think it's appropriate for Casper and other communities like us to have access to those credits, since they were promised to us and at this point not being delivered. Those are the list of items that I'm hopeful you will allow to be a part of your agenda. And if council's okay with that, I think we can move into the local government funding side of this conversation.
That's good.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you. You will see that on your agenda then moving forward. Speaking of funding and local government financing, that is a major topic of discussion. And the reason that it is a major topic of discussion is because direct distribution is in the target sites of a number of our legislators around the state. For direct distribution to be removed from the portfolio of how cities and towns are funded would mean for Casper that our general fund would lose $3.8 million. To put that into perspective, when we started our relationship together back in June of 17, the city's general fund was upside down somewhere between $4 and $4.5 million. So if direct distribution were to go away, that would mean that we would need to start work to balance the budget in nearly the same capacity that we endeavored upon a year to a year and a half ago. So what I'm trying to tell you is that to lose direct distribution outright with no replacement, the city of Casper would be in a world of hurt in the general fund particularly. What you see in front of you is a number of ideas that are currently out there in draft form that would potentially or ostensibly replace direct distribution if it were to go away. You will notice in each of these pieces of legislation, they have unique impacts, if you will, with regard to how direct distribution could be replaced. For example, in the optional municipal tax draft that's out there right now, which is the top entry of your sheet there, it would allow for incremental local option to be exercised, which would net for the city of Casper $3.6 million per quarter increment. And of course, this legislation would anticipate that 1% would be all that a municipality could do. The weakness with regard to this legislation, at least as I see it, is that it would indeed allow for a city to incorporate this kind of thing on a vote basis every 4 years. I think a more ideal situation for cities and towns would be to not only have the option of looking for an election, but also the option of being able to pass an ordinance that would enact that percentage, whatever percentage a municipality might consider, without having to go to a vote. That's one option that's out there, albeit it doesn't include the things that I just suggested. Another option that's out there is the second entry on your sheet, and that is to increase state sales taxes by 0.5% that would be diverted back to cities and towns through the direct distribution formula as it currently stands. The challenge with that is, and probably this legislation generally, is that it anticipates the first 50 million to be allowed to go back to direct distribution, which is less than it currently is, by the way, being allocated to cities and towns, which means that right out of the gate, the city of Casper would lose about $200,000 in the current rate of collections that are being experienced right now. If indeed, however, there were funds collected over and above the 50 million through that additional 0.5% that would be levied statewide, the city could potentially earn an additional $600,000 if indeed a balance of $30 million were collected over and above what is currently being estimated for statewide sales tax collections directed to cities and towns. And so that would be positive. However, the net positive, if you will, would be the neighborhood of $400,000, which is good for the city of Casper, assuming that the numbers that we have put together here is exactly what the state would predict and project to happen, and they have not gone through that exercise yet. So these numbers are what we've been able to sort of postulate. The third entry, which you have already told me you don't like, is the idea of putting taxes back on groceries. That is a piece of legislation that's out there right now, and I suspect you would tell me to not support that or to defeat that type of legislation. But just so you're aware of what that means, if indeed that were brought back at the rate that the legislation proposes, which we understand to be less than the 4% now, it would actually be 3.5%, the city would stand to gain $1.3 million. $1.3 million as a replacement for $3.8 million is not enough in and of itself. And given the conditions that the current legislation, the draft legislation, would suggest, therefore the city would stand to lose about $700,000 out of the general fund if this were the only replacement mechanism available once the legislative session is over. So, my proposal that I think we should promote among our delegation would actually be a mixture of things. For one, I don't think that the legislature will ever be able to get out of direct distribution wholeheartedly, because cities and towns without sales tax bases in their communities will never be able to replace what it is that direct distribution provides. And we've got a lot of those communities in our county, for example, and there's a lot of those communities throughout the state. So I think direct distribution will have to be a feature if indeed we're going to have, real small, ultra small towns in our state from now on, which I suspect will be the case. However, I also think for communities of our size, assuming direct distribution goes away, there really should be replacement mechanisms in place for cities of our stature. In my opinion, that would mean that an optional tax mechanism should be relegated for cities and towns on a local basis, on a truly local basis. I also believe that it ought to be on a true home rule concept, which supposedly this state is built around as one of its pillars of our democracy here in Wyoming. I also believe that the discussion that's currently out there about consensus, which for those of you who may not have heard, is being proposed potentially by our governor to be back into the state's budget, at least for the remainder of this biennium. I would suggest we should support that discussion, support that direction, and see that come back into the portfolio that cities and towns have available to them. If council views our situation such that it would differ from what I'm proposing as kind of the ideal, I do need that direction in that those discussions are hot and heavy right now, and it would be helpful for me to be able to represent what your collective vision is. And I think it would be very ideal for us to be able to communicate that to our delegation at dinner next week.
So option B is kind of your, with modifications, that's kind of your proposal. Well, LSO 206?
Actually, LSO 0091 or 29 with modifications.
Okay.
Go ahead, Dallas.
My inferences I've gotten from talking to Harshman and Eli Bebop is, and they're a little bit at odds, is that they want to carve out a little more sales tax for cities and towns and not hand out that 100 million every year. They also know that there's a problem with the little cities that don't generate enough sales tax where it would help them, and so they would be get money from a different source, such as this consensus funding. But they're also considering allowing cities to create their own taxation districts. And that's, both of them have said that, and that's something that I think they're heading to. And the only thing I would suggest to you, Carter, is this is a lot of information to put on them at a dinner. And I would say that the issues that we really need the worst should be discussed with them. Because I know last time I heard grumbling because we got into this issue about our jurisdiction around the city and all of that. And there's so much more to that than I ever imagined in terms of how other counties and cities feel, and there just wasn't any support. And they didn't even consider any of that stuff last time. And raising taxes, asking them to raise taxes they're just not gonna do it, I don't think, at least right now. But for us to get this sales tax thing straightened out and perhaps getting a larger cut of the overall sales tax, I think that's gonna be where they're heading.
Mr. Mayor, Councilman Laird, the good news with regard to giving them this volume of information is that the majority of them have been engaged in these conversations for at least the summer. And so while it sounds like a lot that we're kind of pouring out to them, they will understand a lot of these nuances because they've been in the interim committees and having these conversations, and they understand what the drafts are suggesting right now. The beauty about what it is that we're proposing, what I'm proposing, is that we aren't asking them to raise any taxes. In fact, I'm assuming that you would not direct me to go after that grocery tax, which would be an increase in taxes.
They're considering that.
Oh, they are indeed. We're suggesting that cities and towns be allowed to have control of their own destiny versus having to kiss the glove of the state and the county in order to make things happen for our own people.
That would be great if they would do that. I agree.
But it doesn't ask them to raise any taxes on a statewide basis.
Sure.
It's hard to forecast how these things will play, but I think with option one, placing taxing authority in the hands of a council without going to the public will be a major deal. and it will be a difficult sell. But that's really what it's saying. And so, something has to happen. And I'm of the opinion that we should revisit the discussion about the food tax, as distasteful as it is, and not necessarily advocate for removing the exemption, but at least not be adamantly opposed to it if it's the only alternative that remains after the others are shot down. Nobody likes it, but if these other things don't happen and the direct distribution is significantly reduced, then to me the onus is on the people who are opposing removing the exemption to come up with some other method for us to fund city operations.
Two really good ones right here. You got food tax.
What if they
should
go
be-
down?
Food tax should be the last thing.
Well, I'm okay with that, but I don't think we should say never under no circumstances.
I think we should.
I would agree with Sean. Taxing food is the absolutely most unfair, aggressive form of taxation that there is. You know, I'd start cutting vital services before I'd want to tax that.
I don't want to tax it either.
No,
Just
I
be clear on
know
that.
I know that you don't. I know you don't. And I
I-
know you're not advocating for that, but I just think that's.
I support Charlie in the sense that I understand if everything else does fall, I think it needs to be an option that we need to look at.
We need food to live. I want to tax it. I mean, to me, it's an insane idea to even bring it up.
But I think these are times in our economy. It's different now. Things are different, and we've got to look at every single option. And if we box ourselves in, then we're going to be looking at ourselves and wondering how can we make that difference. I understand what you guys are saying, but I understand where Charlie's coming from in the sense that we can't just box ourselves in.
We can tax tea. Let's make sure we do that really, because that works out
3%
great.
too.
Well, I tend to
Double.
agree with Charlie. Nobody likes paying any more tax than you have to, but from y'all going shopping, there isn't one of you that can't save 10 or 11% on your grocery bill just by being a good shopper. Not anybody in here. You go to Albertsons, you shop the sales, you get what you need almost every week. Sometimes you'll see 30%. So it's really easy to offset 1% of your total bill and just shop better. And
Would you like a state income tax?
Pardon?
A state income tax?
I would actually.
Because you go up to Oregon and you go buy something and they say it's $20. I'm used to, digging for the 33 cents or whatever it is.
Well, state
No,
income
there's
tax is
no-
not
there's
in the
no-
cards. We have to
there's
change
no
the
tax on
Constitution.
anything. So,
You know, I
But
would
Charlie's
moderate
right.
what I said
on one
and be a
thing,
little bit more in agreement with Charlie.
No, it's
Chris.
there. Something we'll be looking at.
but
I have completely lost whatever thought we had that we were supposed to decide on. I have no idea. If you said let's vote on it right now, I would have no clue.
Could you give us an idea
Well,
for the funding part?
I'll give you an idea of what I think we should do, and we should have a person, I've suggested this before, that I've looked at him and he's refused to take the job, so I guess it's your job. And that is somebody who can sit down with the legislators in a forum to get them to understand this and consider this. I think putting this out in a forum is going to be it's confusing to people, and it's confusing to legislators. There's probably not
I'm confused.
10 legislators down there that understand the tax structure of the state. Nobody's going to pass a deal where they give us the right to tax the public without a vote. To ask for that makes us, I think, look a little naive. I'm
Didn't
not even
happen
sure
well
that,
on the 17th.
I'm not sure it's legal either for us to do it. But we need,
It's almost
something's
places
gotta be done. Something has to be done.
Can you kind of wrap up what we're going to be giving a thumbs up to for you to move forward for the funding portion?
Yes, indeed. What you have in front of you is what's out there right now in current draft form. The Revenue Committee is going to be taking comment on these issues this week, as a matter of fact. What I would propose is that we have to look towards the future with regard to direct distribution going away, because I think it's going to go away. I really don't think it's going to go away as a result of this legislative session, but I do think it's going to be a serious conversation for the budget session next year. And if it goes away without any replacement, which either means handouts or being able to control our own destiny, we're out of luck, and we will have difficult conversations thereafter. So my proposal is this: assume direct distribution is gone. What's the best solution? In my opinion, the best solution is for cities and towns to have the same kinds of authorities that our competing cities and towns have in our neighboring states, and allow for cities, city councils to have the authority like county commissioners do in the state, and tax where they feel appropriate is necessary to do. The legislation that's out there right now allows for increments of 0.25% to be considered locally, and that's another critical piece: local consideration, home rule consideration, that is true home rule, to be allowed to cities. The difference between what I'm suggesting and what's out there in draft form right now is that it doesn't allow for the option of councils to consider that on their own, in addition to the option of taking a vote to the people.
But that is a term limit, Bill, because any councilman who raises taxes is gonna get that one term and that's it. I mean, that really is it. If you raise taxes without a vote of the public, you're gonna have the council turning over every 2 years, I'd say. I mean, that's my thought of the after effects of that part. If they just give us a bigger cut of the sales tax and they monitored it, we got the money and we didn't have to beg for this 100 million, but they carve it out based upon a percentage. And I don't know about taxing authority. I'd say go ahead and ask them for it. I don't think that it's gonna happen in our next 10 years.
Carter needed to respond to that, and then Charlie.
Councilman Laird, Mr. Mayor, I think the nuance that you have to consider with regard to asking for a larger piece of the sales tax pie, the state will consider that a request to increase taxes in order to make that happen, because they are not going to allow a piece of their general fund to be siphoned off for cities and towns, because they're facing financial straits currently as well. And so a request of that nature is tantamount to a request to raise the sales tax in order to make that happen. I just want that to be sort of understood, if you will.
Charlie.
Carter just said what I was going to say and said it better.
The question that I have is, when you talk about direct distribution, what I think you're saying is that, okay, the state collects all this sales tax, and then in a sense of generosity, they say, okay, you can have this much, you can have that much, you can have that much. Is that basically what's going on now?
29%.
Yeah, and what I hear you saying when you say that you fear that the direct distribution is gonna go away, is that the state's gonna sit there and say, we're sorry, we don't have that 29% anymore, we're going to keep it all. You guys are out there on your own to find your own way.
That's exactly what it is.
Yeah.
Mr. Mayor, Councilman, I do appreciate, however, that the legislature is saying, bring us your ideas that would serve as a replacement mechanism.
I'm just trying to track along with you step by step. And
Yep.
so that's the next thing that you're saying. And I think that your wish list or asking list here is probably what we have to say is that, well, if you take that away, this is what we're gonna, we're gonna have to have one or more of these options. I hear what Councilman Laird was saying about that anybody that votes to raise taxes is gonna lose in the next election. you know, I've always said that if I was ever in an elected position, I'd be the most dangerous guy in the room, because I don't care if I get reelected. You know, I'll work to get reelected and advocate for myself, but I'm gonna do what I think's the best. And if we're at a point where we have to vote to raise taxes to meet needed services, I'm gonna vote that way, and I don't care what people think, you know. Well, yeah.
And I agree with
But
you.
I mean, really,
Yeah.
really.
Yeah.
And so I'm not scared by that, but, so I think that we should ask for that, then, you know, whether if it, you know, and I think, and again, I'll use the example of the, buy a new courthouse for 11 million, or buy a new one that you get less for 29 million. You know, to me, sometimes, quote, trusting it to the voters really is not, you know, not always the best thing. You know, I trust the voters, and I like the voters, but at some point, you know, you're elected to do a job, and you gotta step up and you gotta say, okay, hey, this is, you know, this is what we think's the best thing to do. And so, you know, so I kind of agree with your wish list, your things that you're asking for here.
Carter's gonna respond, and then Charlie's up next.
The one thing I'd have you remember of what I've offered for you tonight is this. The state has not been concerned about granting counties what I'm asking you to support. Counties currently have the ability to tax without going to the public, but they also have the option of taking it to the voting public. And so all I'm asking is that we get behind the idea of cities having the same authorities that counties currently do in the state of Wyoming. I'm not suggesting that should be the direction you go or whatever, because that's obviously a
Yeah,
different
that's
discussion for
farther
a
down
different
the
day.
road.
That's right.
And
That's
it's, it really, truly, if you're gonna say, if they always have, cities in Wyoming have home rule. Well, you know, if they have home rule, it's like you have home rule except for this.
Yeah.
If we
The most
grant you.
important thing.
Yeah.
Charlie?
And this is partially for our incoming members. These proposals here are not new. They were all included in the Wyoming Association of Municipalities finance reports. And those documents are highly respected within the legislature. They read them carefully. WAM did its homework. They outlined the whole history of financing municipalities for going back many, many years. And they were told, don't just come and complain to us whenever something comes up that you don't like. Tell us how you think we should do this. And WAM did that in a 2-volume report. And so these are not new ideas. They are ideas that have been proposed. Actually, WAM recommended that we go to a full 5% statewide sales tax, which was a gutsy thing to say, given how people feel about taxes. But these, we are basically echoing points that have been made to them previously. And we've said it repeatedly, but it bears repetition. Of the 50 states, Wyoming ranks 50th in terms of the amount of control that local municipalities have over raising revenue. 50th out of 50. So other municipalities have these authorities, not just the county here in Wyoming, the counties here in Wyoming, but around the nation. They have that authority. And I agree that we should push for option 1, but we should be in a position where if it becomes politically untenable, we're prepared to support these others as well.
Can I call for the question as to whether we're giving him
Sure.
authority? I call for the question.
We can't really call for a question because we're in a work
That's
session.
what it is.
Yeah, I support
You know
Call
what
for
I
a
meant.
thumb.
You know what I
Call for a
meant.
thumb.
I just used big words.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. I appreciate it.
Appreciate that from the gentleman from Ward 2.
Just as a matter of information, Fort Collins has a stormwater tax used as a utility. It's an enterprise account. Shows up on your water bill, so you've got water, sewerage. Well, their trash is separate because it's usually contracted, I think. But they have a stormwater, and that came about after the flood and when it wiped out CSU.
Thanks, everybody. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you.
very much.
Appreciate it.
Are
Thanks
you
for your
leaving
work.
the whole agenda or just that topic?
That was all I had.
Okay.
Mr.
Did you
Mayor.
have something?
Thank
I would
you.
just like to say that, as the WAM representative, many, I think all of the things that Carter has proposed are supported in one or more WAM resolutions.
Where
And I
do I
would-
find that?
And I would, we will get that to you. And I would recommend that as we go to the legislators on the 6th, that we make it very clear where our agenda lines up with the association that represents 99 municipalities, so that it doesn't look as though, they have an agenda and we have an agenda, because in most, if not all cases, we're lining up with that organization, and we should make that very clear, because they're used to hearing from WAM, and it's important that we make it clear that we're lining up with WAM when we do, because we're really in sync on almost all of these things. We just have different things that are of greater concern to us, like the stormwater.
Thanks, Charlie. Council leadership nominations. So you have these little sheets here. What we're going to do is we need to set up a timetable of when we want to create who is interested in running for mayor or putting their name in for mayor or vice mayor. And then I think I got a little bit mixed up, Amanda. So I'm punting. So if you're looking at me like, what is he talking about, Dr. Carter?
Phil, we kind of thought you guys would want to fill out machines. We got confused. So if you want to fill out the nomination sheets and you can just make the list of.
And so is it?
You're not asking these to be filled out tonight.
No. So what we can do is you can have them and give the nominations back next Tuesday.
Why are we doing that? Just a minute. Why don't you do that with the new council? I couldn't understand why the 3 people that are gonna be gone in 34 days should be voting or recommending who should be running this.
Well, the council coming in votes for the new people
In the straw poll.
in the straw poll.
I think they should be able to be the ones.
They are.
But they should be the ones who nominate the people, not, so, and why would we fill out anything in the next week?
Carter.
I can explain it. Mr. Mayor, members of the council can absolutely direct, in my opinion, and with regard to perhaps legal direction, who participates. I think if I'm hearing you correctly, Councilman, you're suggesting that the 3 who are not continuing into the new session or new council wouldn't have a say.
I don't think we should have a say.
The reality is, the ratifying vote is the enabling vote for who becomes the new leadership. And in that circumstance, you would not be participating. However, what we're hearing so far is that for straw poll purposes, everybody's participating. And if we have that wrong, we could certainly take that direction this evening.
I think next year's council should vote on it whenever you decide to do that. I don't think we should vote on it.
You guys don't vote on it. You guys.
We shouldn't have input in it. This is, the council is gonna be running this situation after we're gone,
Right.
and I don't believe we should be entitled to be dictating any kind of influence in that. Personally, that's just my personal opinion.
That's what I meant.
I don't think that we'd be dictating, but I do think that there's a lot of value in having some, expressions of interest, so that we know that, well, okay, this guy, that guy, or whoever, is interested and willing to step forward, as opposed to guys like me, that if I were to fill that out, I would put anyone but me. And, and
But
so
the new
I-
people should say that, shouldn't they? Shouldn't the new
Well, but
people
they-
say,
they-
if they wanna be
Oh,
mayor,
well,
they can put their name
ultimately
down?
have that say.
They do put a final
Because
say.
whatever we do or say before the 1st of January is not binding on the new council.
Well, let me say, here's what I'm gonna do. I'm not gonna fill this out, and I'm not gonna participate in this vote, and everybody else can do what they want. I just don't think it's appropriate.
Sean.
Well, when we came on in 2014, remember this was a big deal? The outgoing members had nothing to do with any of it.
Right.
Because he could nominate himself for mayor, she could nominate herself for mayor. So the 3 that are leaving have no say in it at all,
Right.
period. And that was what we decided then.
Right.
And so they should be getting one of these as well, to fill out.
So we will get.
And these 3 would not.
Yeah, well, I'll give them mine, because I don't think I should
That's what we
vote.
did last time.
I don't think I should vote in it. That's
That
just
was a
my own
big-
personal
big-
belief.
So we'll get one to Mr. Friel as well, and make sure, I would like to have nominations by next Tuesday, please, because then we're gonna do the straw poll that following Tuesday at the work session. So nominations in by next Tuesday.
At the latest, yeah.
Did you hear that,
Why
Kristen?
can't the rule just be that the people who do the nominations by next Tuesday are the 3 new members and the current council?
Dallas,
continue to
because I
serve?
said what was gonna happen. So I just said what was gonna happen.
Did I
If
miss
you-
something?
No, I said they have theirs, they're gonna give their nomination.
Right.
And the nomination will go back next Tuesday, everybody, not you 3. So the nominations will come in next Tuesday from those 3, the new members coming in.
Thank
and
you
the
for
rest of
explaining
council.
that, Mr.
Okay.
Mayor. I'm sorry I didn't
No,
do it
no,
the first
that's
time, and
okay.
I deeply apologize for causing
No.
any kind of stress in your life this evening. That
Okay.
was my intent.
Agenda review.
Looks good.
I love you, Mr. Mayor.
I love you too, Dale.
It's a great agenda.
I don't really.
You have anything?
No, no.
Council around the table.
It's been a good day. Good talk.
Well, I thought we covered a lot of important things.
Dale.
Enough work for today.
Nothing? Sean?
I think we did a great job as far as time management today. It's a great job.
It was really
A lot
good.
on the agenda, and we're done ahead of schedule.
We're not done yet.
We're almost done. Almost done. As long as you don't have anything.
I think if you're not filling out that little card, then you must remain silent.
Kenny, do you have anything?
You're
Dallas.
right there, we-
Jesse asked me to present his information. What I really think, though, should be done is, you've got to run this, you know what I really liked was the way the Senate ran those hearings? Everybody had 5 minutes. And if you got your 5 minutes, when your 5 minutes clicks on, the mayor goes, Mr. Huber, that's it. That's the last word that gets said. And you'll get around it, and because, you know, you can't have these councilmen who take up too much time, you know? Fortunately, you didn't get another lawyer on there, so I'm good. I don't have anything further.
I have 3 quick things. One is, you all got an email about legislative assignments, I assume, from Wham. If you didn't, we'll make sure we forward it to you. It's a big deal because those are the committees that people are working on. And as these things we just talked about are floating through, there are key players that are part of our delegation that we need to be in contact with. And we need to really ramp up our contacts with them, not just meet with them on the 6th, but be in contact with them throughout the session. The WHAM Winter Conference is coming up in February. Strongly encourage people to attend. I've got the full agenda here. There are some excellent presentations that are well worth it, particularly for people coming in to get some basic information about how cities are financed, some of the challenges that we face with refuse collection and all of the core services. They'll all be discussed, and there'll be an opportunity to network with other cities that are fighting the same problems. And then I also want to mention that WHAM has created a whole series of training videos on some of these basic topics, and I hope we can find some way to take a look at those. They're not long, but they're well done. Carter did one of them, and again, it'll be very worthwhile to kind of cover some of the basics of how cities run, how cities interact with the state, and how basic services are provided. And so I hope we'll make those things part of our agenda as we move into the next year.
The only thing I've got is I just wanted to, again, thank Kristen and Ken for coming over and being here. Appreciate it. We'll be spending lots of Tuesdays together, so appreciate that. So we look forward to seeing you guys soon.
You want to change your mind now?
We're past that.
Yes, you are. So thank you for coming tonight, guys. Appreciate that.
I move we adjourn.
Second.
Meeting is adjourned.
Thanks, everybody.
For you two, who's got the most experience to choose who's gonna lead the